Welcome, my friends, to the Peyton Randolph house, one of the Eastern Seaboard's most haunted houses. Over 2 dozen people have died in or around this house since it was built in 1715. As a matter of fact, several eerie occurrences have happened in this house since it was built. The many paranormal experiences that just nobody can explain, some of which I will tell you about tonight. Now, this house was built in 1715, and it was purchased by Sir John Randolph, who was actually knighted by the king in 1721, making him the only colonial Virginian ever to receive knighthood. Now, he later purchased the eastern lot to your right in 1724, taking control of the whole area. Now, upon his death, he willed the area, the house, and all his belongings to his son, Peyton Randolph. Now, Peyton Randolph was one of our founding fathers. He was the president of the first and second Continental Congresses. He was a cousin to Thomas Jefferson, and he was a very successful lawyer in his own right. Now, the problems seem to start with the outbreak of the Revolutionary War. Lord Dunmore, who was the governor of Williamsburg at the time, made the proclamation that any slave who breaks free of their owners and comes to aid the British Army will gain freedom at the end of the war. Some of Randolph's slaves did this, including Mrs. Randolph's personal slave, Eve. Now, although they were promised freedom, at the end of the war, these slaves were returned to their owners. And Eve was treated very harshly by Mrs. Randolph. So harshly, in fact, that a stipulation in Mrs. Randolph's will was upon her death, Eve be sold away and forever separated from her only son. This angered Eve, threw her into despair. She felt so distraught, but she had no control over this. Now, there have been some terrible occurrences that have happened in this house. There was a time where two men got into a quarrel, pulled their guns, shot, and killed each other. No one's really sure what led up to that or what the quarrel was even about that could have led to them shooting each other. Yet they did. There was an occurrence of a war veteran who came to the house to talk to Peyton Randolph about a legal matter. Well, Peyton Randolph was told he was there. He said, "Okay, I'll be right there. Please wait in the parlor." So the man went in the parlor and he waited. And he wasn't waiting that long before he became very distraught, very distressed, very rattled, very creeped out. He became like almost a nervous wreck for some unknown reason. So much so that he pulled his gun, stuck it in his mouth, and blew his head off right there in the parlor. Now, he was alone. There was no one in there with him. There was no one talking to him, no one bothering him. So no one's really sure what happened. No one even knows what the legal matter he wanted to talk to Peyton Randolph was about. This man took that whole thing to the grave with him. There was also a matter of two children who died from falling, years apart from each other, of course. Now, the first one was a child of Mrs. Peachy. Now, she was a woman who came to live in the Peyton Randolph house in the 1800s. She moved in with her family, her kids, everyone, and she had a little boy who just loved climbing trees. No matter how many times she pleaded and begged with, "Stop doing that, you'll fall." And, she would just continually beg him to stop. But kids being kids, he kept climbing the tree because he loved it. Well, one day, Mrs. Peachy's worst nightmare came true. He climbed so high that he had lost his grip and fell right out of a tree, plummeted to his death. Well, this devastated Mrs. Peachy to the point where she picked him up, took him into the house, laid him in her bed while they waited for the coroner. The other instance was a little girl. She was coming down the stairs and she was holding onto the banister while coming down, and she fell all the way down the stairs, hit the floor, broke her neck. Now, there are many people who write it off as an accident. You know, oh, she tripped. It was an accident. That's all. You know, terrible, but these things happen. You know, kind of way of looking at it. There are those people who believe she was pushed. Now, why do they believe she was pushed? Well, on some ghost hunts and some of the ghost chasers and, you know, the people who do the explorations or the paranormal and all that, they bring in all this equipment, cameras, you know, analyzers, all this stuff, to see what they can catch. You know, if they can catch a picture, if they can catch a sound, if they can catch all this stuff, they bring in all this equipment so they can catch. Well, the bay window in front of the stairs, they found and they caught on camera a ghostly image of the face of a young African American woman glaring angrily through the window. This is believed to be Eve, Mrs. Randolph's slave. Now, she seems to target children out of revenge for what happened to her because she was separated from her son, never saw him again, you know, and it was just like a terrible thing that Mrs. Randolph did to her. So she is going to get back at anyone living in that house, especially if they have children. Some people believe that, some people don't. But there is an image out there that proves that she is there. So you cannot deny that. There was also an instance with the Marquis de Lafayette, who came to Williamsburg, and he was doing a tour of the States and talking to veterans of the war. Well, he came to, in October of 1824, he came to stay at the Peyton Randolph house. Now, at first, he wrote in his journal, I consider myself fortunate to lodge in the place of such a great man, Peyton Randolph. Well, his tone soon turned a little more sour after he experienced a few things in that house. Upon entering, he was walking in the door, he was crossing the foyer, and suddenly he felt a hand on his shoulder, as if trying to prevent him from going any further. You know, trying to keep him from entering the house. You know, so whatever it was, it did not want him there. Well, he looked around, there was no one there. He didn't really think much about it. He dismissed the whole thing as his imagination. So, you know, he was shown to his room and he stayed there and he started writing in his journal about how his nights were not very restful because noises and voices constantly kept him up for all of his stay. Now, he was in an area of the house where there wasn't really anyone there. So who were these voices and why were these noises happening? He wasn't in a noisy part of the house. Nobody can explain that. He can't explain that. But he wrote in his journal exactly what he went through there. Now, in a more recent occurrence, there was a child, who was going to the college, who stayed in the house. You see, the house would actually function as an overflow dorm for the college kids. So there was one young man who stayed in there. And he had a very scary experience in himself. What happened to him was he was in bed one night and he felt the tugging on his arm. Well, he thought he was dreaming, so he didn't think really much of it. Next thing he knew, the bed was shaking violently. And he jumped up out of bed to see if someone was playing a joke on him. Was this a prank? You know, who was doing this? Only to find the room empty. He looked around that dark room and there was not a soul to be found there. This completely freaked him out, as it would to any of us. He ran from that house and he refused to ever go back even for his belongings. He stated, you send them to me, you don't send them to me, I don't care, I'm not going back there. Period. Can't really blame him too much for that. There was another occurrence with a security guard who was making his rounds, making sure everything was secure, when he found himself in the basement. And as we all know, In a well-known haunted house, the basement is the last place you really want to find yourself. But in this case, the basement was also used as a break room. They had microwaves down there, they had magazines down there, so they had to go check it every now and again, make sure everything was okay. Now, he started to leave, and he got halfway up the stairs when he realized he forgot to turn out the light. So he circled back around, went downstairs, turned out the light. He started coming back up the stairs, and again he got halfway up when he heard this otherworldly roar go through the entire basement, like the ever so famous "more ha 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 ha" kind of laugh. And this just totally scared the ever living, life out of him. I mean, he jumped out of his skin. So he drew his gun, and then he realized he was alone. It was a dark basement, and he was the only one there. There was no one in there, so there was really no point in having the gun out. So he put his gun away. As soon as he did that, he felt something grab his ankles, anchoring him to that one spot. No matter how much he struggled, no matter how much he squirmed, he could not move from that spot. He was trapped. So he went into panic mode. He grabbed his walkie-talkie. He started, yelling for help in there. Anyone who was on the same channel as him, he was yelling for help. Somebody come save me. I am trapped. I'm caught. I can't get out of here. Please, I'm in the basement. Come get me now. Well, 3 or 4 minutes later, his lieutenant showed up. Now, his lieutenant was trying to open the door, but the door was wedged shut. He couldn't get it open. Now, the thing is, you got to remember this, is like in the 1700s, when they built houses, they built them extremely sturdy. And this basement door was 3 to 4 inches thick. So there was no breaking it down or any of that dramatic kind of stuff. That just wasn't going to happen. So they had to rely on skeleton keys. So the lieutenant got a skeleton key, was able to unlock the door finally, swung the door open. This released the original guard from his trap. He flew up the stairs. He slammed the door shut. His eyes were wide. He had a pale look on his face. He was scared to death. And he said the lieutenant just looked at him in a weird kind of way. And the lieutenant was quoted as saying, "You are the whitest black man I have ever seen." That's how scared this man was. Now, he did leave and take another job 3 to 4 months later, but while he was still a security guard at the Peyton Randolph home, he would only patrol the outside. He would patrol the outside grounds, the outside of the house, that was fine, but he would not go back inside the house again. In fact, he wouldn't go anywhere near the basement. Once again, who could blame him? I mean, I know I sure as hell wouldn't go back there, no question there. There was also a very strange occurrence with the cottage that had been built on the eastern lot that was purchased by Sir John Randolph. Now, it was referred to as a widow's cottage because it was just a small little house, adjoined to the other house. It was just a little place. And there was a lady who lived there with her 2 children. Well, after the children left and the lady passed and everything, the house was just locked up. Nobody went there. Nobody used it for anything. Nobody really bothered with it. They didn't have a key for it because it was never used. Now, one night in year 2000, the fire alarm went off in that cottage. Now, no one knows why or how, because, as I said, no one ever used it. No one ever went near it. But the fire alarm went off. So the guards rushed to the house. This alerted the fire station. The firemen came to the house. They got out. They had to find a way in. Again, like I said, no one had a key, and they couldn't break in, break down the door, break through the window, any of that, because this was now a historical place. So they had to try and pry the window open. Now, this window was only 3 to 4 feet off the ground. So they pried the window open and finally got inside. Now, they looked, and in the middle of the room was a fire extinguisher. And this fire extinguisher seemed to have expended all of its material all over the floor and just remained in a stationary position. Now, the strange thing about this was there was no material on the bed, on the chairs, on the tables, on any other object in that room, only the floor. There were also no footprints anywhere to be found to signify that an intruder had been there. Now, when they examined the fire extinguisher, the only thing missing was the pin. To this day, no one's found that pin or even knows where it went. Now, when they examined the fire extinguisher, first they didn't find any fingerprints whatsoever on it, which was strange. Second, the handle was in place. It didn't look like it had been squeezed at all. The hose was on its side like it's supposed to be. It didn't even look like it had been used. But, again, the guards had to make rounds to check everything out, even though there were no footprints, and they were sure that nobody had been in there because nobody could get in there. But they made their rounds, they looked around, and several questions came to mind. Because when they picked the fire extinguisher up, where it was standing was the only bit of clean floor on that place. Now, that was a question: how did that fire extinguisher go off, expend all this material all over the floor, not hit another object in that room, and then just go back to a stationary position? That was one question that was raised. Another question that was raised was, how did the fire extinguisher get to the middle of the house and expend all that material and stay in a stationary position when that's not even where they kept the fire extinguisher? They kept the fire extinguisher in a whole different room. So how did it get from there to here? That was a question that was raised many a time, to which no one ever had an answer for. Now, why was the Peyton Randolph house so haunted? Well, there are theories. One of them was back in the 1930s, two archaeologists came and were performing a dig. Well, they didn't dig that far. They just got down maybe like 8 inches or so when they found Native American pottery and artifacts. And they were surprised. They did not think they were going to find anything like that around the home. So they dug in another area and they came across the graves of 2 Native Americans who were buried there. Now, come to find out later, there were several Native Americans buried in that whole lot. This had been an ancient Indian burial ground. Now, I know that sounds cliche, but those did exist, and this had been one of them. And there was no way that anything should have been built on that lot. It should have remained bare. It should never have been touched. But as we know, progress is progress, and the house was built, the basements were built, tunnels were built, the cottage was built, and all this disturbed the Indians who were buried there. So a lot of people think that the hauntings are because of these Indians, letting you know that they are not okay with the fact that their graves and their final resting place was disturbed that way, was desecrated in that way. So they are letting you know that they are not okay with that. It is inexcusable, and they are not easily to forgive and forget. Can't really blame them for that either, can we? Now, there was an instance where we went on a tour of the Peyton Randolph house at night, and all the people who came along had EMF detectors. And we got in front of the Peyton Randolph house, and just as we were about to talk about the history of the place, every one of those EMF detectors went from fully charged to dead within seconds. Cell phones froze, rebooted, turned on and off on their own. No reason, no cause, no nothing. They just did it. Nobody could explain why. There was one dark and balmy summer night where we were doing a tour, and the temperature dropped to 20 degrees. It went from uncomfortably hot to frigid within a matter of moments. This is also very unexplainable. There is that theory that whenever a spirit or a ghost passes through, it gets extremely cold. So I am very uncomfortable in thinking what could have been coming through there at that time. I really don't want to think about it. If you want the truth. There was another instance where we went on a late night ghost hunt, and all the people bought spirit boxes with them, so we could communicate with the spirits. Well, the spirits would communicate with us through those spirit boxes, but they would only insist on one thing: is that we leave. Sometimes they would say it very politely. Other times they would use a vast array of colorful phrases. There was one night where we were out flat out cussed at to leave through the spirit box. Now, you may want to believe that this is myth, this is legend, these are made up stories to entertain people. No, no, folks. This actually happened. Every one of these occurrences actually happened. There is videotape of people who experience these things on record. There's written documentation of experiences people have had in and around this house. So please visit our website, visit our YouTube channel, read our blog for any more information you want about the Peyton Randolph house. It is just a very strange place, and some very strange things have happened here. Yet every one of them are true. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is our tour of the Peyton Randolph house. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. I want to leave you on one final note. Sweet dreams.